I'm 23 years old. In my lifetime, I've never lived in a world without Mario, or Zelda, or Star Wars, or Metroid, or The Simpsons, or the Ninja Turtles. But for the first 3 years of my life, I lived in a world without Kirby. I know I didn't exactly have very discriminating tastes back then, but those must have been dark times, because Kirby's one of my very favorite game franchises, and one that I feel, without hyperbole, has shaped me and developed me as a person. This year is Kirby's 20th birthday, and just as Matt has done with the Sonic franchise, I'd like to pay tribute my own way by reviewing every Kirby game that's special to me in some way. When I was a young kid, this sweet lady named Rosa who worked at my school ran a daycare out of her home during the summer. I spent the better part of 2 summers there, and I loved it because a lot of my friends from school also went there, and there was always something fun going on. I distinctly remember camping in tents, barbecue, watching The Sandlot.
You play ball like a girl!
And most vividly of all, playing Game Boy. Almost every kid I played with there had one, and we would compare games and race each other and swap tips and secrets. This was before Pokemon, but I very vividly remember playing Faceball 2000 against each other over a link cable. Man, we've come a long way since then. There was a small bunch of games I sunk a lot of time into at that place. One of the whole group's favorites was Super Mario Land. I remember seeing the other kids' cartridges and wondering why theirs didn't have a yellow bar behind the logo like mine did. Turned out the copy of Super Mario Land that my dad let me bring over there was actually the Japanese version. That blew my mind. I felt privileged. Some of my other favorite Game Boy games at the time were Mole Mania, Bugs Bunny's Crazy Castle, and the game I know I sunk the most time into, Kirby's Dream Land. It's a classic. In my heyday, I bet I was plowing through this game at least once a day. It's very short. You can beat it in about an hour, or less. But something about it never grew tiring, even as I played it over and over. If you put in a simple button combination at the title screen, you could play Extra Mode, which is harder and has different enemies. This wasn't my first Kirby game as a kid. By then I had already been intimately acquainted with Kirby's Adventure on the NES, so immediately I had a few questions. For one thing, why is Kirby white on the box and on the cartridge? I know the game is in monochrome, but the box art isn't. Just look at the background. Full color. He looks like a ghost. I guess if I'd played Kirby's Dream Land first, I would have had the opposite question. Why is Kirby suddenly pink in Kirby's Adventure? Did somebody wash him with Bart Simpson's lucky red hat?
Ah, my lucky red hat. Clean as a whistle.
Alright, but I'm getting off topic. Let's talk about the game. If you're like me and this wasn't the first Kirby game you ever played, the first thing you'll notice is that Kirby can't actually copy his enemies' abilities. I know that sticks out like a sore thumb now. I mean, that's pretty much what Kirby's known for. It's his gimmick in Super Smash Bros.
Kirby's a problem.
Oh, everyone's speech but me.
But this was the first Kirby game. He hadn't had time to build up his shtick yet. So, when we joke about doing it Kirby's Dream Land style in our Let's Plays, this is what we mean. No superpowers, no items, no outside help, no bullshit. Just you and the game. The story in this game is so simple that, to be honest, I'm not even sure it has one. They never really address it in-game, but here's basically what we got. There's this cute little fella named Kirby who lives in a peaceful place called Dreamland. One day, the gluttonous King Dedede steals all the food in Dreamland, and for whatever reason it's up to Kirby to rough up Dedede and get all the stolen food back. Kirby's arsenal in this game is also simple. You walk, jump, fly, and inhale stuff with B. When it's in your mouth, you could press down to swallow it, or B again to spit it back out as a star. That's it. You can't even slide or dash like you can in later Kirby games. This game was designed to be a simpler, easier game, basically like an introduction to the platforming genre, to prepare you for tougher games like Super Mario Land or Mega Man or whatever. And it shows. Like I said, the game's really short. There's only 5 stages, the last of which is essentially a boss rush. Extra mode's kind of tough, mainly because you take double damage from everything, but even as a kid I was able to beat it after enough tries. There are actually a few strange items in this game that never showed up again. When you inhale the microphone, you can carry it with you like any other object, but when you spit it back out, it kills all enemies on screen. It's exactly like Kirby's mic ability from later games, except that there aren't any abilities in this game, so instead it's a one-use item. There's the mint leaf, which lets you shoot bursts of air out of your mouth, and super spicy curry, which makes Kirby do a funny little dance and lets him breathe fire for a while. This obscure little dish actually made it into Brawl as an item, which blows my mind because it was only ever in this one game. So, let's talk stages. The first stage is Green Greens, and man, just listen to that music. This song doesn't get nearly enough recognition. Sure, a lot of people like it, but I don't think people like it as much as they should. As far as I'm concerned, Green Greens belongs right up there with the Mario Overworld theme, the Zelda Overworld theme, and Green Hill Zone, in the pantheon of friggin' amazing video game anthems. Jun Ishikawa and Hidekazu Ando, the two main composers for the series, love to weave its melody into new compositions whenever they get the chance. It makes for a really effective leitmotif, and every time it crops up during an intense sequence or boss fight, it's like a reminder of what's at stake. It's a classic. The stage itself is actually really short. You just kind of fight some enemies, jump around, until you get to one of the easiest and most iconic first bosses in video game history, Wispy Woods. Even as a kid, it was hard for me to take this guy seriously. Kirby has to fight a tree? Can't he just walk around him? It's not like he's gonna give chase. Oh shit! Oh shit! Anyway, you spit some apples in his face, and then you realize that at the end of the stage, Kirby makes 2 copies of himself and dances. If that doesn't just charm the pants off of you, then nothing will. Stage 2 is Castle Lololo. It's your basic platforming stuff, but one thing I think is really odd is that in this stage, as well as in the next one, Float Islands, there are a few parts with water that Kirby can swim in. But he doesn't actually swim like he does in later games. Look at him! It's just his walking animation, but you have infinite jumps. It's so weird to me that they would take the time to so thoroughly animate Kirby dancing, and then not even bother to give him swimming poses. Anyway, the bosses of Castle Lololo are Lololo and Lalala, who are based on characters from one of HAL's previous games, Adventures of Lolo. Not sure why they added the extra syllable to throw people off the scent, I guess. One thing I noticed that I was really impressed with is that if you tap down instead of holding it, you can actually drop down from a ledge without swallowing the thing that's in your mouth. That's really cool, and that's something you can't even do in later Kirby games. Stage 3, as I've already mentioned, is Float Islands. Again, there's not much to talk about. There's water, there's a cave, your basic stuff. But the boss of the stage, Kabula, is really cool. Kirby eats a mint leaf beforehand, and you fight this big blimp thing in a side-scrolling shooter style. These segments would go on to be a staple of the franchise, and I always enjoy them when they pop up. It's a nice change of pace, and they're used sparingly, almost always at the very end of the game. Stage 4 is Bubbly Clouds. It's a stage in the sky where we're introduced to another of Kirby's most recurring boss fights, Kracko, a cloud with one big eye. I love Kracko. He's very iconic and silly and often really difficult. And I'm always disappointed when there's a Kirby game that he doesn't appear in. Stage 5, Castle Dedede, is basically a boss rush. You go through these 4 doors and you have to play a little mini stage that's basically 1 room long before you rematch with the boss from the first 4 stages. What's really weird about it, at least to me, is that before you can exit the room, you have to touch these little Kirby doppelganger things. What are these guys? Why do I have to touch them? They aren't like normal enemies. I mean, you can't inhale them or kill them. They're just sort of there. When you touch them, they, like, explode, and the Gordo that's blocking the exit disappears. It's so weird. I have no clue what that's about. Anyway, when you beat all the bosses again, Dedede's face in the middle opens up and you get to fight King Dedede in his personal boxing ring. Beat him and that's the whole game, unless you want to play extra mode. Honestly, it's hard for me to take off the nostalgia goggles for this game. If you've ever in your life played another Kirby game, this one will just seem really short and kind of boring. Sure, it's by far the weakest entry in the series, but you gotta learn to crawl before you can walk. For what it is, I think it's a classic. Anybody who calls himself a gamer should play it through at least once, especially if you're a Kirby fan. It's not going to blow your socks off, but it's a charming little peek into Kirby's humble beginnings. And besides, even if you totally hate it, you'll only have wasted like a half hour of your time. So, that's Kirby's Dream Land. It holds up okay, but things would only get infinitely better in Kirby's Adventure.